This week, a look at perpetual teenager Archie and his friends. I talk with Archie expert Jack Copley about some of the history of the comic, including the married life, as well as his favorite Archie creators and more. It's a flashback to episode 338 from November 12th, 2012. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for helping to keep the show going. You can pitch in by pledging at least $2 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics.
This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. I'm really excited about this week's show. I've long wanted to do an Archie episode, and this is finally it. Okay, I'm talking to Jack Copley, who is in Kissimmee, Florida, and he's, see if I get this right, back issue manager at Coliseum of Comics?
Correct, I'm the buyer. The people bring collections to me.
I see. Okay. Yeah, well, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I wanted to have you on partly because I've been wanting for a couple of years to do a show about Archie comics, and I wanted to have someone on who knows more about them than I do. But also, you are a major collector of Archie. Now, you told me that anything that happened, any comic in kind of the Archie universe, you have a copy of it?
If it involves Archie and or his pals, I have
right.
it.
Yeah.
Don't collect hedgehogs or the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, stuff like that.
Okay, but like Josie and the Pussycats and Sabrina and
right.
all that you've got.
Yep.
Okay, and going all the way back. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's the best thing I describe for people is I started reading them when I was 11 and just never stopped.
But some of these are from before you were born, I suppose, right? Because it goes back to 41.
Yeah, Archie started in 41. I was actually born in 59. Okay. I don't care if anybody knows that. And I started reading them in about 1971.
Mm-hmm. So from that point on, I mean, a lot of what you've got is stuff that you bought as a kid then.
Nope, I sold everything in 1989.
Oh, wow. And then you started from scratch.
I started over in 1997.
And why did you decide to do that?
Well, one thing led to another, but it's a really long story. To make it a little bit short, the whole time I collected Archie seriously from 1977 to 1989. And for reasons I don't want to go into, I got out of comics completely, sold them all, was done with it. And in 1995, a friend of mine and I went into a hobby store, and in the back of that hobby store was an Archie's model from Aurora. It was just a model kit you could put together. I saw it advertised in the comics when I was buying them as a kid. I went to model stores. I tried to find one, never did. And there it was in the back of this little model store. I passed it, but he went back later and bought it for me for a present. So that started me looking for other Archie toys and stuff. At a toy show, there was a guy with a box of comics. Before I knew it, I was collecting the comics again.
Got the addiction started up again.
Yep, and it got right in on the cusp of eBay popping up, and so I started buying them left and right on eBay, and before I knew it, I had a big giant chunk.
And where do you store all of this?
A separate bedroom. My wife loves to tell everybody she had to give up a bedroom to Archie.
The house guest who never leaves.
Yep, exactly.
I see. And so how long did it take to get all the issues?
Just over 7 years.
Okay.
But remember, I had the advantage of having the knowledge of knowing what I was going for. You know, I didn't have to figure out which ones I still needed. I knew from day one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Plus, I drove I worked for a comic book company out of Illinois, and we went to shows all over the U.S., everywhere, probably 25 to 30 a year. So I drove the truck full of comics out to the shows. So I was at all these major shows looking also. So it filled in a lot faster for me than it does for a lot of people.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk about various aspects of Archie. Well, I was looking at this first. Okay, I should talk about what I read to prepare for this. So, Best of Archie Comics Volume 1. And then some of the recent stuff where, well, where the what ifs of if he got married to Betty, if he got married to Veronica, Will You Marry Me is the book, and then then I guess they started an ongoing series of the married life of like both realities, and I read the first volume of that.
Okay.
And then I also from this Best of Archie comics I found out about the Love Showdown, and
Okay.
so I got a hold of that also. That's from like 1994.
Correct.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I was somewhat of an Archie reader in the 70s. Well, and of course, when I was a little kid was when Archie was really in a heyday, because there were the cartoons on TV and there were all kinds of merchandising tie-ins. I remember Welch's grape jelly that came in an Archie drinking glass.
Yep, there's 12 different ones, two sets of 6. And each one of the 6 has there's 7 different versions of the bottom. And yes, I have all 84 glasses.
That's right, there was like a character face engraved in the bottom, right?
Right, each one had 7 different characters.
Wow. Yeah, I think we had one glass and it got broken. So
You can get them on eBay for like $5.
Yeah, and then weren't there some of those cardboard cutout records from cereal boxes?
I have all of those, though I have not bought an actual cereal box. I have the cutout records, and there's several different versions of those too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always never understand how those made it through shipping without getting all scratched up.
I've played, well, not real recently, but 10 years or so, I played a couple of them on a record player. They still played.
Mm-hmm.
They sound terrible, but, by our standards today.
Yeah, they were never the highest sound quality, but... So, but yeah, I mean, the early 70s, there was always some Archie cartoon series on. Remember, they went through several different ones.
They changed it almost every year, literally.
Mm-hmm.
They changed the format, they added things, they subtracted things. And it was the mainstay of Saturday morning from 1968 to about 1976.
Yeah, I remember at the tail end there was the U.S. of Archie.
Yep.
Which, I don't know, I remember watching that one, and it was just it was really short on the comedy and heavy on the history, and I think that might have been what killed it, because it wasn't the most interesting Archie cartoon I ever watched, or certainly not the funniest.
At the time, for me, I was interested in all the history because we were counting down to the bicentennial. It was all in that time period right before there.
Yeah, that's true. You're older than I am, so that might have. I mean, I was, let's see, 11 at the bicentennial.
Yeah, so I've been 16 going on 17.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I certainly watched Archie on Saturday morning, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting looking back at that first story at the beginning of the Best of book from 1941. Archie looks quite different, and the characters seem to be a little younger, like not maybe junior high age.
Yeah, they were definitely pre-driving. I mean, that was sure they weren't driving a car yet.
No.
But they aged them quickly. The very next story, they're in the age we know them.
Right, yeah, 1952, the first Veronica story, then there's like a high school dance or something.
Yeah, literally, the first story was Pep 22, December 41, and that's what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. The very next story in the January 42 issue of Pep, they're clearly 3 or 4 years older.
Yeah, Archie #1. And Pep 22 is, I guess Betty has just moved to town, and Archie #1, Veronica, appears, so... Right, almost from the beginning, we've got those two.
Yeah, and Reggie was right there too, same time period.
Yeah, and Jughead, complete with crown.
Yeah.
That crown never goes away.
Nope.
And it's interesting these characters have survived all these years, and I think if you look at Archie himself, he's maybe in some ways the least well defined character. He's just kind of an everyman, I guess. I mean, he's from the beginning. He's sort of defined as a klutz, but I don't know. That doesn't. I'm not sure if I'd call that his defining characteristic.
No, the klutz part still is there to this day. They still use that, but it's not.
It's not part of every story by any means.
No, he's the hero, and from time to time he's the hero. Sometimes he's the idiot. But it's like you can ID with him. You could be him, assuming you were a teenager and average looking, having two beautiful women chasing you.
Yeah, well, that's the part that's a little hard to believe because I certainly didn't have that problem. But
me too.
And I wonder what it is about Archie that Betty and Veronica both like so much.
Well, there are a few stories on that. And part of it is, there's a story where Betty goes out with Reggie and she sees Reggie's ego, goes out with Moose and Moose's strength. Everybody has these big, giant, defining characteristics that are a big drawback. Where Archie just kind of molds in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, then there's also the story in the best of where Betty thinks that Archie is dumping her for Veronica, and then he pulls some strings and is at a toll booth when her family is going by and patches everything up. And I think that kind of also reinforces what at least what Betty likes about him.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's everything. He's everything a teenager would want to be, yet still klutzy and has faults. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yet in that story, he manages to pull strings and really pull something off. So he's sometimes everything goes right for him.
Yeah, that's a fun little story. That was one of the ones I recommended for the book. They sent me an email saying we're asking Archie. We're asking people what are their favorite 3 Archie stories. Mm-hmm. And I got into it, and I sent them a list. I managed to cut the list down to about 10, and they chose a couple of them. But it was kind of fun doing that. Mm-hmm. There's a volume 2 out now, and there's a volume 3 coming out.
Cool. So now, did you scan some of your collection for this book for Archie Comics?
For this book in particular, no. I think they had everything of this. I've done some scanning for Archie in the past when they've needed some really old stuff.
Yeah, well, they credit you in here as an official archivist or something.
Yeah, what happens is I got to know a couple different people, and they put me in contact with them when I was up at a New York show, and they figured out who I was and how big my collection was, how much my knowledge was, and figured out that they could pay somebody to scan stuff there in the office, or they could pay someone who knows what they're scanning and have them scan and send it up. And that's what we did. I did a lot of it for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. They haven't been using me too much lately, but that's okay too.
Well, maybe they've got all the best stuff now.
Well, they got all the old stuff. I scanned every Archie appearance from 1941 to 1948 for them.
Oh, wow.
See, the problem is they have a complete library, but it's in hardcover books. They always had the comics bound and put in a book. Mm-hmm. If you try to scan a book, you break the book open.
I see.
Get away with it scanning a comic most of the time.
Yeah, they've got them, but they're not in a good format for putting in a scanner.
Right. The artwork's long gone, so
sure.
That was the original reason, and that's why it was mostly 40 stuff I had to do. 60 stuff and up, they've got lots of that.
Yeah. But yeah, getting back to the characters a little bit. So I guess that the love triangle thing, even though Betty and Veronica were present from almost the beginning, the triangle wasn't really an established thing until like maybe the 50s or 60s.
Well, no, it was I think it's Archie number 7 from 1944 or so is when they first really touched on it. There's a little story that talks about how It's an eternal contact thing, and this triangle will go on. But it wasn't really a focus,
Hmm.
more or less, until you got into the 60s, because even the 50s it was very one-sided. Archie wanted Veronica, and Betty wanted Archie, but it wasn't
Ah,
necessarily Archie wanting Betty until you got way into the 60s.
I see.
It was
So,
always Betty pursuing Archie, Archie pursuing Veronica.
okay, so it was a triangle, but not quite the same dynamics as we think of now.
Right. Well, not the complete triangle, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean the Archie that I know from the 70s and up, it's almost like maybe he's I don't know, like he's having both of them at the same time almost. It seems
Well,
like.
there's a perfect story in Archie at Riverdale High #2, where Archie's reminiscing about his life in Riverdale High, and the whole it's a whole book length thing, but one section of it is on his relationship with Betty and Veronica, and he states in one of the panels something to the effect of, I wish I could pull myself in too, because he talks about the reasons he loves Betty and the reasons he loves Veronica.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and do you remember what his reasons were?
Um, oh, he goes into, um, I could probably quote it better if I went and grabbed the comic. But that's the other thing. I got the instant library, 20 feet from where I'm sitting. But he goes into how Betty makes him feel important, and he's always on. He always puts her. He's always on a pedestal with Betty.
Hmm.
Yet with Veronica, he's a carpet, and she steps on him. Yet his heart goes up and down when he sees either one.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, of course, they're always both drawn very attractively, so you can't blame him in that in that sense. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And of course, Veronica is the rich high society beautiful woman, and so yeah, there's certainly an attraction there. And it's the same kind of dichotomy, the Ginger Marianne thing from Gilligan's Island. It's kind of the same choice, I would say.
Right. Ginger and Marianne probably are loosely based on Betty and Veronica. Nobody just realizes that.
Yeah, yeah. Betty and Veronica came first. And yet, the other thing that's interesting to me about them is that in a lot of the stories, Betty and Veronica are best friends.
As long as Archie's not involved, yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
which is yeah a little hard for me to believe sometimes, but
Well, it's what you'd want two teenagers to be.
hmm.
And it's a part of the Archie world isn't necessarily the real world. It's what the ideal of the real world. It's the
Oh
best
yeah,
case scenario.
right, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I noticed that in a lot of senses where they're teenagers, but I mean, you can't imagine a story about like teenage pregnancy or drugs or something. Those things just don't exist in Archie's world.
There's been some smoking. There's a
Mm.
story on smoking. There's a story on Midge's parents getting a divorce. They've skirted around it, but they've really not dealt with it directly.
Hmm. Yeah, like if they have a party, it's burgers and malts. There's no alcohol to be seen.
Exactly.
And well, they'll refer to the malts in with terminology as if they were alcohol. Like I can't remember what they said exactly, but something that people might say about alcohol, like having one too many or something.
Right.
But
Right.
but they're talking about malts.
Right. Jughead chugging them or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I mean, sex is sort of there in the background, but it's never really overtly mentioned. I mean, I don't know. It's the relationship with sex is really hard to pin down exactly. Like when Cheryl Blossom comes in, some of the dialogue there gets, for Archie comics, very suggestive.
Well, yeah, they definitely pushed the borderline in the early '80s with Cheryl.
hmm But and of course, all the women are always drawn, with very nice figures, and there's sort of sex present in that sense, but it's never acted upon.
No, well, there is, when you start to psychoanalyze some of it does become disturbing. There are stories from the highlight of Dan DiCarlo in the 60s drawing them so beautiful, and them causing people on the street, guys driving down the street to have a car wreck, and running into lampposts. And when you stop and think about it, you go, wait, these are teenagers that adults are Googling, and so yeah, no, it's always been there, but it's just done for humor, and that's it, really.
Yeah.
There's an interesting story from the 70s where Betty and Archie are coming back from an event, and the car breaks down. They run into a lake or something, and they have to get out of the lake, and they go register for a room together, and they pretend to be a married couple, and they don't have their baggage, and it's wet, and they get into the hotel room, and she calls her dad, and her dad comes, and he assumes when he breaks in and Betty's wrapped in a blanket and Archie's just putting his pants on that something went on. But they just took their clothes off in private to dry their clothes,
Sure.
Yeah. You know where that would have been with real teenagers.
Yes, But yeah, in Archie, it's just, of course it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's like Three's Company. Of course nothing actually happened. And then, so Jughead, he's perfect as a friend for Archie because he's not interested in romance at all. So he's never going to be a rival for either of the women. He's just, the sounding board for Archie.
Right. Well, and technically he'd be a better fit for either one.
How so?
Well, he's got the intelligence that attracts Betty. Mm-hmm. He's a smart guy. He knows his own world, but he's also got the other that attracts Veronica, that no one can tell him anything. It's his way or the highway. Jughead is probably a more well-defined character than any of the others.
Mm-hmm.
He's very confident and sure of himself. My favorite stories are still the Jughead versus Veronica stories, where the whole aspect of Jughead is pissing Veronica off.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he seems like a goofball, but when you think about it, he really knows what he wants. Yeah, and he's not at all the klutz that Archie can be.
No, but he also, if it doesn't matter to him, he doesn't play sports because he doesn't care. Mm-hmm. But if something's on the line, they can grab him and put him in. There's a great football story where Central High kidnaps Hot Dog because they want Moose to not play in the game, and so Archie says, "No, put Jughead in. We'll let Moose set." And he managed to convince Jughead that Hot Dog's on the line, and so of course Jughead's unstoppable in the football game.
Mm-hmm. What position did he play?
I think he did just about everything, if I remember the story right. He just tore up the field.
Yeah, and I also wonder how he can eat all those burgers without gaining weight. I guess obesity also doesn't exist in their universe.
Well, no, they've touched on that one too.
Okay,
but it's just his metabolism runs really high because they've had. There was a great story where they had a bunch of younger kids emulating Jughead and trying to eat like Jughead and only gaining weight and getting sick. And he had to explain to them that his metabolism was way out of whack and not normal.
I see.
But again, it's that best of reality. How do you make it real? Do you really touch on that in Archie?
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. I mean, they don't want to get that real because it would kind of break the whole thing. But, yeah, they touch on things that are real. Mm-hmm. And then sort of make it fit into the Archie world.
Coming up, we discuss the married life, Jack's favorite Archie artist, and more. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon. Follow the link to Amazon from there and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
Hey there, Bat fans. It's JB in New Orleans, your host of Bat 77, the 70s Batman podcast. I am a child of the 1970s and a lifelong Batman fan. And each month, I summarize and review a randomly picked Batman comic story published in the 1970s. From the pages of Detective Comics, Batman, The Brave and the Bold, and World's Finest. I also read from the letters pages and highlight all the memorable ads from the comics. On past episodes, I have also discussed Batman's appearances on Saturday morning television and the Power Records audio adventures. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you stream or download your favorite podcasts. Or you can find me on the web at bat77podcast.libsyn.com.
The other character I wanted to bring up was Reggie, because if you look through this best of, Reggie seems to fit his defining characteristic seems to kind of change depending on the needs of the story. Because sometimes he can be a rival for Archie, and sometimes he's just playing tricks on everybody, and other times he's just Archie's friend.
Yeah, I think the best defining excuse me, the best defining part of Reggie is when he is the trickster, when his target doesn't have to be one person, it can be the whole world.
Mm.
But he started out as just the rich, preppy, I guess would be the way to state it today. Mm-hmm. He was the rich kid who was a snob. I don't know. That's a good story. When did the prankster really take hold?
Well, it seemed to come in and out. I noticed certainly in Love Showdown, he sees what's going on with Betty and Veronica both thinking Archie. Well, Archie has that letter, and it ends up getting destroyed, and they don't know what was in it. And then Reggie steps in and convinces Betty that it was from Veronica, and Veronica that it was from Betty, and then they're all angry at each other.
Well, yeah, the more they fight outside of him, the better. Though that's been done too. Mm-hmm. I should have reread that story. I knew you'd just read that, and I knew, I probably haven't read it in 20 years, 15 anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun story, although it meanders a little bit. Cheryl Blossom shows up halfway through. It's like, oh, where'd she come from?
Well, and this has never been reported by Archie, and I don't know this for fact, but at the time, what we had heard about Cheryl Blossom is she appeared on the scene in the early 80s, and her outfits got skimpier and skimpier, and the powers that be at Archie had gotten a letter from one mom and decided to end the character. So she disappeared for 2 years because one mom said her outfit was skinny. And it was, I guess, a last-minute plan on the story to put her in and have her be the choice.
Yeah, then she moves back to town in Love Showdown. Right,
but they never really settled on what they were doing with the character. She had interest. She became the villain that Veronica could no longer be because they had softened up Veronica so much. But they almost took that over the top. Mm-hmm. She was too mean and too evil.
Yeah, is she around these days? I haven't seen... I mean, I've been reading the recent issues of Archie, and I haven't seen her.
In the regular Archie world, not so much. She's been involved in the married life stuff. Mm-hmm. She's probably not part of the first book, but she's part of the second book. She shows up back from Hollywood.
Okay.
But yeah, in the regular Archie, gosh, I can't remember. It's been a couple of years since she showed up, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not even remembering her most recent appearance. The last couple of years, Archie's been about, jumping from one thing to another, like the Occupy Riverdale stuff that just happened, and Archie meeting Kiss. So it's...
And then, of course, the marriage stuff, and then they had him getting married to Valerie.
Yeah, that was quite a story.
Yeah.
I like that they're exploring that myth. That what if Archie did really get married?
Hmm.
I think the timing was right on it. And it's a fun thing to do.
Hmm.
But I don't know. They're trying. I like the comic. Life with Archie is very interesting, and is one of the few Archies, the new Archies that I look forward to reading to all the time.
Hmm.
But I don't know if I can tell you why. the stories, it's treading new ground for me, I guess, from being someone who's been reading them for 30, 35 plus years.
So, Life with Archie is where they're publishing these married life stories.
Yeah, that's where the story starts in Life with Archie. The first issue, they do it. Well, the story starts in the Archie gets married in Archie 600,
Mm-hmm.
but it goes from that. They started exploring the future in Life with Archie.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes out about 10 times a year, and then they collect them in the trades after they get a few issues out.
Yeah, I didn't get time to read the second trade. I finished the first one, although I found it a little confusing that they were alternating Veronica stories and Betty stories. I just read all the Veronica ones, and then I went back and read all the Betty ones.
That might help some. I mean, that won't. You'll need to read them back and forth in the next volume a little bit, because the worlds kind of collide a little.
I see. Yeah, well, I did notice as I read them the way I read them that I could see how it would kind of work, because there were like similar things happening in both storylines. And
they brought Kevin Keller into both storylines.
Okay, that must be in the second one. I haven't seen him yet.
Yeah, and why I didn't mind it, and I don't mind the character, but I shouldn't complain about Archie in case anybody from Archie listens. But did they really have to get him married in both issues? I'm afraid they try to do too much for shock value these days. Let him marry in Betty's world and not marry in Veronica's. I don't care which is which. Make them different.
You're talking about Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay. Was there a gay marriage?
Yeah, there's a gay marriage. It's in the 16th issue of the magazine.
Okay.
I'm not sure where it's going to fit in the reprints.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yeah, you go from one world he's getting married here, and then you go to the other world he's getting married there. Would that necessarily need to be?
Yeah. Well, there is. It's a little bit too much of the same thing happening. I mean, there's the scene where the guy who discovers Jughead's hamburgers and wants to franchise it, and in the Veronica story, it's Archie puts him up to it. But then in the Betty story, the guy just happens to have his car break down or something and walks into the restaurant, and then the dialogue is identical after that.
Right. That's what I mean. It doesn't have to follow the same pattern. You don't have to have a reason. It could be different. Jughead could be destitute and poor in one, and rich and famous in the other,
Yeah, it might be a little more interesting if Archie's choice changed other things more.
Yeah, like Moose is the janitor in one, and he's the mayor in the other. I like that. Mm-hmm. Archie's a teacher in one, and I'm not sure what he's doing in the other.
But yeah, I think in both of them, the characters pair off pretty much the same way, with Jughead getting together with Midge, and Moose with his yoga instructor, and Miss Grundy and Mr. Weatherby, and so on. That all happens. Although in the Veronica story, at least so far, I haven't seen any reference to Miss Grundy getting sick.
Right. Well, do you want me to tell you things that you might not have read?
I mean, maybe not. But
yeah,
at least in the first trade, in the Betty universe, Miss Grundy gets some kind of serious illness and dies, whereas there was none of that in the Veronica story.
Right.
So
well, they're not even really attached in the Veronica story, so.
Yeah, so that is different.
That was one of the shocking things to me as an Archie reader, is I would have never thought about Mr. Weatherby and Miss Grundy. Not even in the slightest. I could see all the other pairings. Midge could marry anybody. It wasn't as surprising to me. Mm-hmm. I know I'd never marry anybody I worked with.
Yeah, and in both of them, she's just sick of of Moose and his anger, and beating up anybody who looks at her, and so he's dealing with his anger issues, and it's kind of interesting. Although the other thing that sort of bothered me about the married life stuff is that it seems like the stories will kind of zigzag so that for a while it's just like everything is kind of falling into place, click, 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 everything seems to be working, and then something goes bad, and then it's all bad, 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 and then it all gets good, 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 good again. You know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah. It's sort of, it's almost the same. The reason I don't read the comic book Invincible anymore. It runs on long periods of bad.
Yeah, it just feels a little bit too sort of controlled by the writer.
Yeah, well, maybe it'd be more interesting if it was two different writers.
Yeah, well, I guess there are two writers, but they're both writing everything, right? Michael Uslan and Paul Kupperberg?
Kupperberg does almost all of it.
Okay, yeah, Uslan, I guess. Well, he wrote the original.
Uslan laid it out. He wrote the original marriage thing, and then he laid out some thoughts and ideas about which directions they'd go.
Right. Yeah,
but it's been all
riffing
Kupperberg
on a lot of
since.
that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been all Kupperberg since, and he's a smart Archie guy. I've talked to him about Archie, and he understands the characters as good as anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I don't mind it. I just Like I said, I wanted to run different paths for sure. It doesn't have to run the same path.
Mm-hmm.
I was almost very unhappy, though, when they went where Betty and Archie are happily married and Veronica and Archie are divorced, though. So I guess I'm talking myself into a loop here.
Well, I can sort of see how that would happen. Well, and the other interesting, I think what Kupperberg does differently is like in the Will You Marry Me stories, Mr. Lodge is, kind of, very affable in both versions, where he's the villain in Kupperberg's stories.
Well, yeah.
Especially when he marries Betty.
You learn a little bit more about that. That's a really slow developing part of the story. You learn a little more about Mr. Lodge as you get more to the newer issues.
Okay. Yeah, well, I've got the second trade here. I may just keep reading this.
I like it when they seed a story and just develop it slowly. I do like that part. That's probably part of, now that we're talking about it, that's probably part of my attraction to Life with Archie, is because there is some seeded story that's going to show up, which is storytelling they'd never really done before the last couple of years. I remember
Go ahead.
When I first discovered a couple of continued stories, I was all impressed and amazed.
Yeah, well, they've tended to do self-contained stories in Archie, and yeah, it's interesting to see them do more of a long form.
Yeah.
And yeah, when that's done well, that's always appealed to me. Like you say, seeding something and having it pay off later. That's I guess kind of why I got into superhero stories too.
Right. Well, I think that now I'm glad we talked about it, because that makes a little more sense to me why I like the Life with Archie magazine.
Now, how is the magazine coming out? Is there like a Betty story and a Veronica story in each issue?
Right. It's a 64-page magazine, so it's literally two comics put together.
I see.
And you get the next chapter Betty and the next chapter Veronica. Originally, they'd planned it as two separate comics. But when they went to Diamond Comics and got an order, and then got an order from their distributors, the order was one amount, and then somebody suggested a magazine, so they went back to their people and say, well, what if it was a magazine size? And the order was like 10 times what it would be.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, they went with it because I guess they could put a magazine in more places.
So it's larger than a comic, but the dimensions are larger.
Yeah, it's People Magazine,
okay.
Us Magazine, that kind of format.
Interesting. Yeah, so they can put that in a different rack, and then also people don't have to choose if they're running low on funds. Just pick up one and they've got everything.
Right. It's a It's a good buy. It's $3.99 for a 64-page magazine, where an average comic now is 32 pages for $2.99 or $3.99.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a good deal.
I'd love Archie to do regular Archie stories with that kind of storytelling.
Yeah, that would be interesting. The usual high school Archie, but yeah, I wonder why they had to go to having them as adults to be able to do that kind of thing. It would be interesting.
Well, because the whole marriage storyline sold like crazy. I mean, way above their expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was so big. They were talking about it on iFanboy every time an issue came out.
Yeah, they were selling something like 1,500 copies in the direct market on Archie, and they got orders for like 58,000 or something. I mean, the number is that kind of crazy.
Wow.
So obviously it's something that needed to be explored.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, they could go back and do some. Now, I guess they have also done some, like, I think they're still in high school, but they're sort of romance stories, and it's a different art style, a little bit more realistic art style. I haven't actually read any of those.
Yeah, they called it New Look. I think it was just New Look is what they called it. Some of the stories were pretty good, others were pretty average.
And were those all self-contained stories, or did they continue?
No, those were usually 4-part.
Okay.
Usually, the first story in a digest for 4 months, or some of them were in the comic. I do like some of that storytelling. Mm-hmm. But I would like it to be continuous, like Life with Archie. Yeah. See, now you're bugging me. Now I'm gonna want that.
We'll have to have a petition and demand it from Archie Comics.
Yeah, let's have teenage Archie. I've met Bob Bowling, who's the original artist of Little Archie, and he got to know me. One of the things he told me was, you should write for Archie. They could always use another writer on comics. And I'm like, I'm not a writer. What could I do about Archie? And he goes, you know the characters as well as anybody I've ever known.
Sure.
He goes, just put them in a situation and see how they react. But every time I came up with a situation, I could think of a story that had been done before. So maybe it's hard to go into that kind of storytelling for teenagers.
Well, especially after 70 years of that series.
Yeah, exactly.
So who are some of your favorite Archie creators?
Far and away, my favorite artist is Harry Lucy.
Okay.
Harry Lucy was the main artist. Archie, the title Archie, he was the main artist from the mid to late 50s on into the middle 70s when he retired. And the storytelling is just beautiful. Slapstick. I mean, the artwork, the girls are beautiful. The artwork is great. It's instead of having straight up and down drawings, there's a lot of angular stuff going on. Pick up any 1960s issue of Archie and you'll see Harry Lucy artwork.
Yeah, I'm looking at in the best of book, The Organizers. What is this? They're going to hold a dance, the most unforgettable dance in the history of Riverdale High School, and they sell tickets, and and then this is the one.
Moose is the ticket guy.
Yeah, and then they tell Moose, don't let anybody in without a ticket, and then they forget their tickets and they can't get into the dance that they organized. That's
Harry Lucy art. And it is. I mean, it's just beautiful always. I wish I could have met him, but he died in like 1984.
I see.
Before I was old enough to realize you could actually contact a comic creator.
Yeah.
In 1984, you didn't think about that, really.
Right, yeah. There was no internet. You would have had to put something in an envelope with a stamp on it. But I see what you're talking about with the angular. Yeah, just like the positions of the characters.
Yeah, it's never, it's never stiff. I mean, it always moves.
Yeah.
When he did some covers that he did in the 50s, the late 50s, he did the covers for Pep Comics. They're just beautiful. The artwork is just gorgeous. It'd be anything. If I was selling pinups, I'd be blowing up Harry Lucy covers. But my best privilege in my whole life has to be meeting and getting to know Bob Bowling.
Mm-hmm.
And he is just one of the sweetest, nicest guys I know. He said to me one day, "What can I add to your Archie collection?" But his artwork is soft. Its storytelling is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, everybody loves Dan DeCarlo, but I always try not to talk about Dan DeCarlo because everybody does. I just don't want the other artists to be forgotten and lost.
I see.
There's many great artists in Archie. Now, unfortunately, the writers is a lot slimmer in the selection. Once you get past Frank Doyle and a couple others.
Bob Montana?
Well, Bob Montana is a different category all in of itself.
He did writing and art, right?
Bob Montana started out just in art, but after a couple 3 years working for Archie, he went off to the service and didn't do any work.
Mm-hmm.
When he came back in the middle 40s, that's when they started the newspaper strip.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 100% Bob Montana. He wrote and drew that strip. And he got to because that's where the money was. In those days, the money wasn't in comics; it was in the paper. It was in the newspaper.
Sure.
So and there's some amazing stuff in those newspaper strips when you read them all together. That's really lost, beautiful comic book work.
Yeah.
And he had continuous dailies. The storytelling is just fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a bit of that in the book from 1948, and yeah, that had one of the funniest things for me in the whole book, where they're outdoors in the winter, and Archie brings Mr. Lodge this blanket, and he's sitting on a frozen lake, and then it turns out that the blanket is an electric blanket, and it melts the ice, and he falls in the water.
That's every single day. That's the kind of storytelling he did, and he did that literally until he died. He died in 1975 of a skiing accident.
Oh, wow.
Well, actually, he had problems on a skiing accident, I guess, and had a heart attack or something to that effect. In my day, in my newspaper, it was reported as a skiing accident, so that's how I always think about it.
Okay.
I remember cutting that out of the paper. I was visibly upset.
Wow.
But at that time period, I knew the name Bob Montana, I knew the name Dan DeCarlo, and I knew the name Bob Bowling, but I didn't know any other names of creators then because they didn't tell them.
Right. I never saw credits in Archie comics.
Nope. When you learn to look, there's a lot of hidden signatures in the 50s and early 60s.
Ah.
But until 1980, they didn't run credits as a practice.
I see. Yeah. Nowadays they do. I see. Yeah.
Oh yeah, complete credits. Even up until a couple of years ago, they didn't run credits on the reprints.
Huh. Interesting.
That was the current regime at Archie that said, no, we got to run credits for all these reprints.
Sure. Now, you mentioned Kevin Keller. So it's interesting they brought in a gay character when have they ever brought in, I mean, other than Valerie, I don't remember ever seeing any African American characters.
There was Chuck in the 70s.
Chuck. Oh.
Yeah, Chuck is the cartoonist.
Okay, yeah, he shows up in The Married Life. Yeah.
Yeah. He was, everybody went politically correct in the 70s.
Mm-hmm. So, but I mean, I'm not sure how to feel about Kevin just because, I mean, it feels a little bit too kind of having a token, you know what I mean?
Contrived?
Yeah, like, oh, we're going to bring this guy in because he's gay.
Yeah. I talked to Dan Perrin about it, and it was something that they kept telling him. The way he tells it is they kept telling him to do something different. And he joked, he says, I'm going to put a gay character in it. And they gave him a kind of sure you will attitude. So I guess they kept pressing it, and he said, all right, I'm going to do it. And he did it.
But nobody ever has sex in Archie comics anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and now does he show up in the regular Archie title? I haven't seen him much in that.
Kevin Keller?
Yeah.
He has his own comic.
Right. But
he does interact with the teenage Archie characters.
I guess I see him here. I haven't actually read this issue, 637, but it looks like he's in here.
His first story is from an issue of Veronica. And the whole story is kind of cute because Veronica sees the new guy and he's a hot new guy and she wants to get to know him. and can't figure out why he's not interested in her. He tells Jughead, he goes, "Look, Jughead, I'm not interested in her because I'm gay." And Jughead accepts that he's gay and just has fun torturing Veronica that she can't have him.
Yeah, that sounds like Jughead.
And that issue was Archie Comics' first ever sellout of a first printing, and they went into a second printing on that.
Interesting.
So, obviously it was a success. They had to use them some more.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine they put out press releases about that kind of thing, don't they?
Oh yeah, it was in the press ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, I think he's kind of overused for the shock value today.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, as it's becoming more kind of normal and accepted to have gay characters and stuff, maybe he'll just disappear. I don't know. I mean, because unless he's really appealing as a character aside from his sexual orientation.
He's growing on me a little, when they do the storytelling right, but it seems like half of the stories are on Kevin now.
Yeah.
Where's my half on Jughead,
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky to do that well, just have him kind of fit in with the other characters and not kind of be there because of some particular aspect of him.
Right.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, Dan Parent's a great person.
Mm-hmm.
He's I again feel privileged because I know him. I've had him to my house to see the Archie Room.
The Archie Room.
Yeah. When all he did was go back to the Archie offices and tell everybody about it.
Thanks to our patrons for supporting Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and our other podcasts. To join them, go to patreon.com/deconcomics. Patrons get access to podcasts about the early years of The Amazing Spider-Man, Jim Starlin's run on Captain Marvel, and more. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. We'll be covering 2 more submitted comics in an all-new Critiquing Comics next week. Until then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.